Violating a grave strikes most of us as one of the most taboo, awful things that a person can do to the memory of another after they have passed. Burying the body respectfully is one of the few things a human can do to honour the deceased and demonstrate care and affection for who they used to be. Yet the sacred nature of burial is not enough to deter some from robbing the dead, or in some cases even removing the corpse. No matter what the consequences are, a look at history reveals that there have always been people determined to get what they can from some of the most sacred places. Here we'll look at 5 real people who robbed graves, either for a living or for some other bizarre reason. Hanpan Offer. Egyptian tombs were built to honour the dead and to protect valuable possessions arranged in the tomb. Much care was placed in the construction of these tombs, yet the effort was not enough to deter robberies, which were surprisingly frequent occurrences. As early as 3150 BC, tomb raids were a significant issue. They posed so much of a problem that Egyptian graves may have been built to block robbers from accessing important chambers. However, even these precautions were not enough to prevent thieves. Robbers began raiding tombs shortly after the funerals of kings, and it's possible that guardians charged with protecting the tombs may have been corrupt enough to join the robberies. The problem was so awful that Amenhotep, the first who ruled from 1541 to 1520 BC, had a special village named Deir al-Medina constructed to add security to the tombs. But even this did not work, as the lure of precious stones, gold, and exotic goods proved far too appealing. One of the masons at Deir al-Medina was named Hanpan Offer. In 1110 BC, he was caught robbing a tomb, and he was severely beaten as a way of extracting his confession. Though robberies were frequent, they tended to be punished harshly, and beatings and even mutilations were common punishments. That did not stop Hanpan Offer from repeatedly raiding tombs. In his confession, he even admits that tomb raiding was his usual habit. He uses copper tools to force his way into the pyramid of King Sopikamsuf and locate the underground chambers. Here is a portion of his translated confession from the Amherst papyrus. We found the god lying at the back of his burial place, and we found the burial place of Queen Nubkas, his consort beside him, it being protected and guarded by plaster and covered with rubble. We opened the sarcophagi and their coffins and found the noble mummy of the king equipped with a sword. There were a large number of amulets and jewels of gold on his neck, and he wore a headpiece of gold. The noble mummy of the king was completely covered in gold, and his coffin were decorated with gold and with silver inside and out, and inlaid with precious stones. We collected the gold that we found on the mummy of the god, including the amulets and jewels, which were on his neck. We set fire to their coffins. He had been arrested before this offence, but he was able to avoid long-term imprisonment by bribing a district scribe with some of his stolen goods. He was then free to raid again. Though we cannot know for sure what his confession was really like, the matter-of-fact description of raiding a dead man's resting place is callous and disturbing. Singh and the Kittas brothers. This next case is a little stranger because it involves the robbery of an actual corpse. Tassos Papadopoulos was the 5th president of Cyprus from 2003 to 2008. He was a heavy smoker, and eventually he developed lung cancer and died. He was laid to rest in the capital for almost a full year. Then in 2009, one of the president's former bodyguards visited his resting place to light a candle near the grave. However, he discovered a large hole next to a mound of soil. The police concluded that the grave robbery was very well thought out, as the men appeared to have worked hard through the night until the next morning. 3 months later, a man named Sabrajit Singh felt guilty and gave a phone tip. The body was found in another cemetery, and eventually 2 brothers were arrested in connection with the violation. The motives for this robbery are peculiar. One of the brothers had been charged with murder and wanted to use the body as a negotiating tool to rid him of his life sentence. Singh, however, just wanted to use the body to extort money from the family. After being convicted, Singh received an 18-month sentence, and the Kittas brothers received 20-month sentences. William Cobbett. This next case also involves the theft of an entire corpse. However, the motive for the robbery had nothing to do with personal gain. If you're familiar with American history, you may have come across the name of Thomas Paine, an English-born American revolutionary who wrote very influential, well-remembered work such as Common Sense, which encouraged the 13 colonies to achieve independence from Great Britain. Paine died on the 8th of June, 1809, and was buried beneath a walnut tree in the grounds of his farm. However, in a strange move, 10 years after his death, William Cobbett, a British newspaper editor and former opposer of Paine's ideas, developed a retrospective admiration for him, and decided Paine's final resting place was ill-suited to someone he considered a great man. So he arranged to covertly have Paine's remains exhumed and shipped to Britain, where he planned to exhibit them in London to raise funds to create a colossal statue to Paine's memory. He also tried to sell rings made of locks of hair clipped from Paine's skull. However, the venture had few takers, and within a year, Cobbett had gone bankrupt and spent time in prison. During this time, Paine's skeleton was stored away in a cellar at Cobbett's home, until Cobbett died himself. But when his estate was auctioned off, Paine's remains were discovered wrapped in newspaper. It's unclear what happened to the bones after this time, although it's known the auctioneer refused to include them in the sale. It's likely parts of them are still scattered around Britain, owned by various collectors. There is also a rumour he was eventually buried in a now decommissioned graveyard in the south of England. The irony of it is that in life, Paine's friend John Wesley Jarvis asked him if he could have his skull to study when he died. His reply was no, leave me alone when I'm dead, I should not like my bones to be disturbed. Professor Jensen. This type of grave robbery is probably the most well known. During the 1800s, there was no reliable way to safely obtain corpses for medical studies and dissections. Many doctors and students needed a way to develop their knowledge of the human body, and to support their desire, many of them turned into body snatchers. Apparently, a woman named Elizabeth Joyner from Baltimore had a terrible dream in which her niece, Jane Smith, had been removed from her grave by a body snatcher. As it turns out, 4 medical school janitors had robbed her grave, leaving behind a crucifix. A man addressed as Professor Jensen had been in charge of the robbery. This was not the first time he had robbed a grave for cadavers. In fact, he trafficked cadavers throughout the country, and Jane Smith's body ended up on his dissecting table. A grand jury indicted Jensen, but he did not suffer consequences for his actions. This was not uncommon, as these kinds of robberies rarely had a negative impact on the careers of medical practitioners. In fact, not only did Jensen's career continue, he also inspired another to take up body snatching. One of his clients, Dr. Randolph Winslow, relied on him to obtain cadavers. But when Jensen could no longer provide him with bodies, he began to dig up corpses himself. Even though he was also apprehended, his career flourished. His papers, and even his materials about grave robbing, are at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Muhammad Farman and Muhammad Afree Ali. This case is about modern-day grave robbers whose motives had nothing to do with money or kind intentions. The perpetrators simply craved the taste of human flesh. In 2011, Farman and Muhammad Afree were jailed in Pakistan for violating graves. They had exhumed an unknown amount of freshly buried bodies and used the rotting flesh to make curry. Because they didn't actually kill anyone, and there is no law relating to cannibalism in Pakistan, the pair only served about 2 years in jail for their disgusting crimes. After their release in May 2013, they quietly resumed their lives in the small village of Kwawa Kalan. But when neighbours started to complain to police about the pungent smell wafting from their home, they searched the premises, and they were horrified to find the head of a recently deceased baby who had been buried in a nearby grave. The brothers later admitted to digging up the body of the child and cooking him in a curry. This time, the 2 brothers were sentenced to 12 years each, and the true number of how many corpses they dug up and ate may never be known. So that's 5 real-life grave robbers throughout history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.